All right. So Alessia is a lecturer in sustainability and urban science at the Edinburgh Futures Institute and the Edinburgh School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. So I had to read it from from a paper, and that's at the Edinburgh, the University of Edinburgh. Her research sits at the intersection of urban planning, geography, and computer science. So that's a very interesting, let's say, crossroad. Alessia was a postdoc in the Geographic Data Science Lab of the University of Liverpool, and she holds a PhD in computer science of, again, two organizations, University of Torino and University of Luxembourg. Okay, as some of you, most of you have seen yesterday, that we are trying to introduce footprints for agile expertise. So we have shown you expertise of the content of the whole conference, the content of one session, and the new members. And now it's the turn to Alessia, who has given us also the keywords of her expertise. And it's now available in this footprint. So this is the personal footprint of Alessia. So you'll see that she has knowledge in thematic mapping, artificial intelligence, machine learning. You can see here spatial statistics, data mining, and here are some improvements to be made to the footprint because things are overlapping, but these are the applications, and it's also of urban and sustainability applications. All right, so I just wanted to show you this. And then the next is the keynote. So it's about the relationship between the built environment and human behaviors. And let's say sustainable cities. So that really fits into, let's say, the theme of this conference. And she's presenting the results around mobility, accessibility, and pollution. And what I particularly will be interested in is also the, let's say, combination of traditional data and new data. And for this keynote, there's another footprint. And then I will leave and give the word to you. So this is another footprint of only the keynote. So we are also able to do this. So this is about spatial statistics, thematic application domains. And here's also something about citizens and use of geospatial information. All right. So now you have the floor, Alessia. And can I have a big applause for Alessia?
Thank you. Thanks again for being here so early. I can't avoid reiterating that it's really happy you're here so early. I honestly don't know if I would have come to my keynote if I didn't have to. So thanks for being here, and thanks to the organizer for having me. I think it's a really great honor to be talking at AGILE. So how do I switch the slides? Okay. So I'm Alessia Calafiore. I've already been introduced. I'm based at the Edinburgh Futures Institute and Edinburgh School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture of the University of Edinburgh. In this slide, you can see a number of logos besides the University of Edinburgh one, because most of the projects that I will be talking about were carried out during my postdoc at the Geographic Data Science Lab of the University of Liverpool, and a couple of projects were in collaboration with the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority and the Alan Turing Institute. So in this talk, I will present you a few projects I've been working on that in a way try and make use of urban data science to try and inform sustainable mobility transitions. So now this slide is quite obvious. I'm almost embarrassed to talk through this because I think we all know that we need to meet climate mitigation goals, and that would require transformative changes in the transport sector. Transportation accounted for approximately, the IPCC estimated that accounted for approximately 25% of energy-related emission in 2019, and 70% of that is road transport. We've also seen in a very sad natural experiment during COVID-19 that behavioral intervention can actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I'm not saying that we need to get back to lockdown or not hugging people or kissing people, but we collected a lot of evidence during those years that changes in mobility can actually have a significant impact in how much we emit. And I will also talk you through one project where we tried and estimated that as well for the UK, for Great Britain, actually. Also, the IPCC highlighted that while biofuels and mobility are important technological advancements, they're not enough to meet the climate mitigation goals that we need. And so it's also important to focus on demand management. So then moving to my research, which is more focused on potential behavioral intervention. So I've always been doing research around the relationship between the built environment and people behaviors and how they influence each other. And in the last years, I've been trying and focusing on looking at this relationship in the context of sustainable mobility transition. So try and help cities transitioning towards more sustainable mobility, so using less resources and emit less. In the context of sustainable mobility transitions, it's always very important not to overlook existing inequalities, because one of the main criticisms that are common in the public opinion, but also, that have to be considered by the academic world, is that sustainability transitions need to be just and they have to avoid strengthening existing inequalities. So that's also a dimension that I try to implement in the project that I will be talking about. In particular, the kind of project that I will present to you today, one is more related to some characteristics of the built environment that can help improving active travel, so more sustainable mobility, which is this idea of the 20-minute neighborhoods that became quite popular in the last few years. Then, as I mentioned before, I would talk about very briefly about the project that looked at air pollution during COVID. We specifically focus on the impact of the role that work at home played in this reduction in emissions. And as Rob has mentioned it in the beginning, I tend to work with both traditional and new forms of data. And so the last project will be around looking at mobility patterns, leveraging new forms of data that we've been analyzing. And yeah, that's it. So I will go through this project and then try to come up with a summary of the evidence that we collected from all these projects that try to be useful to inform sustainable mobility transitions. Sorry, it's not very polite to drink to the, but I don't have a glass. So 20-minute neighborhoods. Now, this is not a brand new planning idea. It builds upon existing planning theories like new urbanism, smart growth. There was also a theory in transportation planning about the pedestrian shed that is highlight that people will prefer walking if the distance is not longer than 10 minutes walk. So it's not a brand new idea, but for some reason that I will try and hypothesize as well, in the last few years it gained momentum. The idea is very simple, which is probably one of the reasons it became so popular among not only the public opinion, but also policymakers. So we've seen in the last few years, several local authorities starting implementing this idea in their plan of intervention. And the idea is at its core that residents' most basic needs should be met within a 20-minute round trip from home with sustainable transportation modes. Generally, the reference is to walking and cycling. In some instances, we also see public transport. As I said, we've seen that circulating quite a lot. again, it's not a new thing, even in the formulation of the 20-minute neighborhoods, because we've seen that in Melbourne, in a plan for Melbourne in 2017 already. Then a couple of things that happened that probably motivated the popularity of this idea were the successful campaign that Hidalgo ran in Paris and was re-elected on a manifesto that was very much focused on the 15-minute city. That sort of spread the idea that this is something that can be popular among people. And so policymakers kind of started thinking that this is something that can produce a successful policy campaign. And also these were the years of COVID, because we're talking about 2020, 2021. So during COVID, we were forced to stay local more. And so people also started rethinking the importance of the local environment. So we've also seen that in the UK, Waltham Forest was one of the first local authority starting implementing this idea, and the Scottish government also made a plan for these 20-minute neighborhoods. In the last few years, they actually implemented this trying and implemented this in a few local authorities. So it's something that is progressing. So it wasn't just something said that year and then disappeared. I mean, I know that they are actively working on this with local authorities. At that time, I was at the GDSL, and we got a small fund from University of Liverpool, a Partnership Recovery and Resilience Fund, to work with Liverpool City Region around this theme of the 20-minute neighborhoods. So on the right side, you can see Liverpool City Region is a combination of 5 local authorities, and the project was to try and look at the state of the affair, let's say, in terms of access to services in Liverpool City Region, and also how that relates with the number of demographic, socioeconomic, and environmental variables. So just very briefly, we computed routed distance to the closest services, different services types, and we picked the one, we counted how many services types were reachable within a 10 minutes walk. Now, for this project, we used OpenTrip because R5R wasn't yet ready to go, but now for some follow-up, I'm actually using R5R, and a shout out because it's great and it's much faster. So thanks, Rafa. So these were the results of this first work. So on the left side, you can see the services type, the count of services that were accessible within a 10-minute walk in Liverpool City Region. We selected the services using mostly common sense, to be honest, literature review and common sense. So going through health, education, and grocery and entertainment. What the services that people need in their everyday life is questionable, so it's not universal all the time. So it's true that this is one of the limitations as well of this work, but it kind of gives a proxy of the variety of services that you can consider kind of basic in a short walk distance. On the right side, you can see a spatial clustering that we did based on the access to services. And so the yellow areas were those that we could consider kind of closer to the idea of a 20-minute neighborhoods, because those that have a substantial consistent high access to different services types. So we then looked at the proportion of population that lives within those yellow area, and you can see that there's a quite significant difference across the local authorities in Liverpool City Region. Liverpool and the Wirral are those who perform better, who is also those that are the most urban and dense. So that's kind of quite expected, although Knowsley performs very poorly. So that's something that should be highlighted in this context. Now, we ran a regression analysis looking at the relationship between access to services and a number of socioeconomic, demographic, and environmental variables. I'm not going to go through all the results as it would make the talk too long, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things that we found kind of more interesting. So globally, so with an OLS, we found that there is a negative relationship between access to services and car ownership, as expected in a way. So the more access to services, the less car ownership, and vice versa at a global level. Then we also run a multi-scale geographically weighted regression to see how that varies across Liverpool City region. And what we found is that this is something that is mostly true. So this negative relationship is something that is mostly true for rural areas. So most of the observations that are statistically significant belong to rural areas. So there's a problem of car dependence in these areas that tend to have less services, and this relationship is strong, significant, and negative. And while in urban areas, the picture is more varying. So from the map on the left side, you can see the boundaries of the sort of 20-minute neighborhoods overlap to the car ownership distribution, which is, well, for brown color is less car ownership. Green, blue is more car ownership. Oh, sorry, the contrary. I got confused. So it's more car ownership, the brown color, and then the green is less car ownership. So as you can see, I mean, it's true that parts of Liverpool and parts of the Wirral tend to have less car ownership and also correspond to high access area. But at the same time, there are specific places that we highlighted to target to the Liverpool City, Liverpool City region, to highlight that there are parts of the cities that have either low access to services and low car ownership, which is quite risky for people that tend to also be in more deprived area and tend to end up into forced car ownership to reach the services. And also there are areas that have, you can also see it from the multi-scale geographically weighted regression, that is a tiny brown dot where you have like a positive relationship between car access and car ownership and access to services. It's a very wealthy area of Liverpool, and is where you have high car ownership and high access to services. So also try and control the use of private vehicles in these areas we thought was quite important. And then a very final one, very quickly. This is just overlapping the 20-minute neighborhood boundaries and the air pollution data. And again, more brown, higher pollution, more green, less pollution. And we can also see that there's almost an overlapping in many of the high access area. You also have high pollution, which is also kind of, we see that relationship also in the global analysis, regression analysis. And that is sadly expected because more services tend to be more attractive, and people might end up there by private vehicles from areas that are less served, and so create more emissions in those areas. So very quickly, this is another related project that was focusing more on aging. One of the limitation, I would say limitation of this idea is that putting such a strong constraint on time will make everything that you see very much dependent on the speed at which people walk, which is not always the same. So when we ran this, when I collaborated to this project that was focusing on aging, from the map on the left side, the top left, you can see we computed the accessibility score with two different walking speed, and you can see that the picture changed quite substantially We also relate that with the aging place classification, which is a geodemographic classification of the aging population. It's not that something I worked on, but we collaborated on this project. And the categories that you see on the violin plot on the right are those of this aging place classification. The top one shows the relationship between the areas that belong to that geodemographics and the accessibility score, and the bottom one is when you have a reduced speed. So what we see is that it drops for everyone, obviously, as expected again. It seems to be dropping more for categories that is called urban comfortable aging. I'm not a big fan of urban as a term, but it basically means something that is like at the sort of suburbs that are in between urban and rural area. It's also comfortable aging. So here we're talking about people that tend to be wealthier and have also more, be also more able to afford private vehicles. So this is also something to consider in combination. Now, again, a few notes on this idea of 20 minutes neighborhood in general. There are scholars in the last few years that have been talking about this, and across the world, we've seen implementation of this plan with many variation of minutes. So it ranges from the 5-minute city to the 45-minute city. And so that brought some scholars to also kind of question whether it makes sense to put such a strong limits on the number of minutes rather than focusing on looking at the specific context. And so maybe in areas, in cities that have already a very dense built environment, you can be more ambitious. You can think of creating in a hyper-local situation where you have more services, but in areas where you have low density, it's a bit too much to think that you can reach that. The 15-minute city, and that is also something linked to the reliability of these plans, and something that has been discussed in another paper that reviewed this plan across the world. They noticed that very few local authorities put clear and specific target or benchmark to then make their policies accountable. So in a sense, they were questioning whether this is truly a planning innovation, or it's just some city branding that local authorities tend to do, but they don't really want to, they don't have specific target to achieve, and then it becomes more of a branding than anything else. At the same time, though, and being a quantitative person, having something that is measurable seems great, because in a sense, that also opens up lots of spontaneous initiatives that, even if in the plan you don't have those targets, kind of make policymakers in a way accountable, because there are many initiatives that are popping up, mapping access to services at a global level or a city level that can be used to argue pro or against a certain city government. Okay, so that is all for the 20-minute neighborhood. Now, very quickly on air pollution, I wanted just to quickly show you some results from an analysis that we did during COVID. So we used nitrogen dioxide emission data collected by DEFRA. We used 10 years data to predict what would have been the level of emissions if if lockdowns were implemented, and then we compared that with a difference in difference modeling to what we actually saw during the lockdown in terms of reduction. And at the GB level, we found results that were broadly replicated also in other studies. So we're pretty confident that what we've seen during lockdown was a reduction of approximately 40–50% of the nitrogen dioxide emissions across Great Britain. The thing that we focused more specifically, and we did that combining air pollution data with the Google Mobility Report. At that time, many big companies started sort of providing data on changes in mobility. And Google provided these mobility reports that were showing kind of changes across different categories. Now, they talk about mobility. Actually, this is more like access to specific services. So they measure the difference in the sort of check-ins, let's use a term that came from another social network, but not Google, but, you know, sort of access to different places, and they looked at the differences. Categories were like retail, supermarket, parks, public transport, workplaces, and residential. And we looked at the difference in difference modeling conditional to mobility in these categories. Specifically, we look at local authorities that had a higher or lower than the median reduction in mobility. And so we do see that they are kind of different, but the main gap is related to the workplace mobility change. So just to look at more more clearly. So the red dots are reduction in local authorities that have a higher than the median mobility in workplaces, and the green one in lower than median. Higher reduction is the green one, lower reduction is the red one. So more mobility red, less mobility green. And so that kind of highlighted that in areas that have had more work at home, and from the map, you can see the workplaces map, lower mobility, where especially in the south, also Scotland, but especially the south, the area around London and the region around London and the north were those with more work at home. And these local authorities actually had a higher reduction in air pollution compared to others. So in that sense, we kind of, that made us think of work at home as a potential tool to add to the toolkit to help reducing air pollution. Obviously, it's not as simple as that. There are pros and cons of work at home. I will come back to this later on. But that was just some evidence that we found from the analysis that we ran during COVID. So now this is another project around the use of smart data, so using new forms of data to try and study mobility patterns. Specifically in this project, we were looking at differences in mobility patterns across different socio-economic groups of people. And we used Spectus AI data. These are anonymized GPS trajectories collected in 2019 in Great Britain. All data were collected from opted-in users. And Spectus AI does a very nice thing for a researcher, because it pre-processes the data to identify approximated privacy-preserving home and work location, as well as SOPs. And they use GeoAshes to provide privacy-preserving location, which is a set of alphanumeric code. Is a hierarchical that identify areas of the Earth rather than using coordinates. A stop is defined as a collection of location aggregated to obtain a single stop entity with one reference and dwell time. Now, so what we had as raw data, let's say, mostly raw data, because we processed the data again to have sequences, hourly sequences of stops. So we didn't focus on trajectories on the old trajectories, but only on stops for each hour. So we picked the location where the users spent more time during that hour. We filtered the data quite significantly to have only sequences that were as much comprehensive as possible. So we dropped all sequences that had less than 70% of the hours covered by locations. And but what we wanted to look at was the differences in mobility patterns, specifically in relationship to the type of built environment that people are exposed to throughout the day, and the differences between different groups of people. Because during the day you can be exposed to very different built environments. So your journey can start in a rural sort of countryside place area, then you can dive into urban life for a while, stop for take some grocery and go back home. So we weren't interested in specific places. We were more interested in the type of built environment that people were exposed to during the day. To do that, we built upon a project that Daniel Arribas-Bell was leading on urban signature. That's a project that he was doing. We had a little branch of it, more focused on sort of the functional nature of these places. So looking at the clustering came from 156 variables that were around human activities in those areas. And we ended up with this functional signatures, which is, by the way, open data. It can be reused. That let's say classifies part of that classifies the areas of cities and rural areas as countryside, industrial areas, residential, services, and urban. All of these have different subcategories that you can see from this map. So to add context to these trajectories, sorry. So to add context to these trajectories, we replace the geoashes, so the specific location, with the categories that we obtained from this functional signature. And then we also, as I said, we wanted to look at differences across different groups of people. Now, people are diverse in many different ways. The categorization that we used was the index of multiple deprivation. For Great Britain, that we use the decile that ranges from 1, that is the most deprived decile, and 10, that is the least deprived decile. And we classified users based on the level of deprivation of the home location, of their home location, that was an information that we had. So in the end, after all this processing, we had sequences of types of built environment by hour and associated to different IMD levels. So these are the sequences for the various IMD groups. We color coded I know it's not the most readable plot, but we color coded these categories to have, like, green is the countryside, red is more urban, pink shades are services, blue, green is residential. And again, there are a few observations that we also made in the paper that I'm not going to talk about, but something that I think is more relevant also in the context of this talk is that what we found is that from IMD 1 to IMD 4, there are more like red colors, so more urban, mixed-use services, and IMD 1 also industrial places, while from IMD 5 to IMD 10, you see a significant increase of greens and dark blue, which means low density, more countryside areas. And again, just as a reminder, IMD 1 is the most deprived, IMD 10 is the least deprived. And we also see that in commuting times, which were the peak times of transitioning from one type of one type of functional signature to another. So this is the least deprived group, and you see that there's a big chunk of people from the countryside moving to a much more mixed set of types of built environment, and the same as a return trip. So from much more varied kind of types of built environment to mostly low density residential and countryside, while for the most deprived group, the transitioning is much more balanced, and you have many more people in residential well-served areas compared than people from the least deprived group. So I don't know how much time I have, but it's okay, I'm on time. So just some final points. We saw from this project that less deprived groups tend to live and commute from and to country low density signatures. And we also saw from the other projects around the 20-minute city, 20-minute neighborhoods, that rural areas tend to have high car ownership and car dependence. So that kind of brought up themes as the importance of densification of this rural area to try and reduce a bit this car dependence of people in these areas, and also the importance of rural-urban connections with sustainable transportation modes. There's also a question point on work at home and how that can be implemented to improve things. There is an interesting work. Now, I didn't put the reference, and now I feel very bad because I wanted to put it, but that looked at data on work at home from a survey, and what they found before COVID, this study was, and what they found is that when you have more work at home, you also tend to have more trips, longer trips to reach many services. So it's important to think work at home in combination with access to services to avoid, let's say, car dependence that is linked to services. Was also very interesting, the point made by Rafa yesterday, I think, because it's also with work at home, you can be a trip creator if you get everything delivered. So again, another point to think about the importance, also have like more dense and served environment that would incentivize avoiding using the car. So we also seen that more deprived groups tend to live and be more exposed to urban well-served signatures throughout the day, which is positive in a sense because these groups of people tend to have more access, and this is something that is also found in many other studies related to Great Britain. So there tend to be like more access to services for people on in more deprived group, let's say, than people in least deprived group. And that is positive because it helped reducing transportation costs. But at the same time, we've also seen that air pollution tend to concentrate in these areas. So people that might be the less contributor to emissions in cities then may end up being those who are more exposed to air pollution. So it's important also to think in urban areas of the role of urban green. Now, I don't even have to say, I mean, there are many researchers in the UK working on access to green space, and they're much more aware than myself of the importance of urban green in urban and dense area. And also, there is a debate on low traffic zones, which I'm sure they have to be discussed also in relation to how people who really needs to get there also for work and really can't use other transportation modes. But at the same time, that seems to be a good way to avoid areas that have high access to services, and so where people may use more active travel to be overly exposed to air pollution. And yeah, it's not really visible here, but in that context, it would be useful to think of mobility and accessibility at the same time, because if you create a low traffic zone in an area where people can't walk, can't access any services, it might be problematic. So accessibility should be part of the reasoning. But yeah, again, it could be a good strategy for reduce the overexposure of these people to air pollution. Just a few mentions of a project that I've just started. I don't have anything to show about this because it just started a week ago, but I'm quite happy about it. Is around the use of smart data, try and identify gender differences in smart data, because now with these new forms of data, also from the last project that I show you, we can really kind of reach much more detailed information about how people move around. But gender differences are often overlooked because with these new forms of data, demographic information are very rare. So with this project, I will be experimenting on data fusion approaches, try to combine traditional and new forms of data to disaggregate spatial traces by gender and hopefully capture gender differences across immobility patterns in the context of Scotland. I wanted to mention this because I'm happy about this, but also because if anyone has any suggestion, this has just started and it's my first project as lead. So any feedback or suggestion is more than welcome. So just to conclude, urban data science can play a role in informing sustainable mobility transitions. These were only just a few projects that I've been working on, which is not necessarily the best in the scene around urban data science projects for sustainable mobility transition, but there's a lot going on in this field, and I think it's a moment when it's so needed that it's good to move towards that. The diversity of needs should not be overlooked, so we try to look at aging. I'm now trying to look at gender. I think it's important also to realize that sustainable mobility transition impact on people with different needs in different ways. And also socioeconomic consideration are key, but they should also be based on evidence, because something that I've seen, at least in the public opinion, so not in the academic world, but in the public opinion in the UK at least, is that sometimes there is a bit of there is a bit of an excess criticism in any sort of change that we ask to people in terms of behavioral change, that sometimes is related to the fact that this is going to be affecting people on lower income more than others. Now, sometimes it's true, sometimes evidence says it's not that true. So it's also important to base these considerations on evidences. Now, the project I talked to you about are far from being only my work. So these are the papers of this project. So you can see lots of names there, most of them from University of Liverpool. So as I said, I'm lecturer since not that many years. So it's most of the project were from my postdoc years. These are on the mobility patterns. And yeah, and that's me. Thanks for listening.